Today on CityCast Denver, fur trappers, soldiers, miners, land speculators, gamblers. Most imagery from Denver's Wild West past is dominated by men. So where were the women? They existed too, and some were businesswomen, like the madames who ran the city's notorious parlor houses and brothels. The story of sex work in Denver is as old as the land itself. And today, History Colorado's assistant curator of serials, Ann Sneesby Cook, joins me to go back in time and pull back the curtain. Today is Monday, March 20th. I'm Bree Davies, and here's what Denver's talking about. Ann Sneesby Cook, welcome to CityCast Denver.
Well, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
And I have to ask straight out, who was the most notorious madam in early Denver?
Probably either, it's a competition. There are lots of notorious madams in early Denver, but probably the most well-known are Maddie Silks and Jenny Rogers.
Tell me about them. Who were these ladies?
Well, they were entrepreneurs. They were businesswomen. They really set the trend for opulence along Denver's Market Street, which was also notoriously called the Row. And they were women who came west, who saw a business opportunity, who opened parlor houses, and not only opened one parlor house, they opened many. They owned property up and down the Row and were constantly changing hands and doing deals. And so they opened these parlor houses. They employed women who worked as sex workers in the houses. And they made quite a bit of money doing so.
Yeah, how did the Maddie Silks and the Jenny Rogers get to that place? How did they do that?
Well, they started out small. Jenny Rogers was born on a farm in Pennsylvania, and she was the daughter of a farmer who sold produce, and she sold produce on the streets of Allegheny, Pennsylvania, and just thought of a world bigger than that. She married a doctor and realized that being a doctor's wife was not the life for her. So she took up with the steamboat captain and eventually made her way to St. Louis, where she became close with the chief of police, and then made her way to Denver, where she had a bit of a nest egg, maybe provided by this acquaintance with the chief of police, and she bought her first house actually from Maddie Silks for about $5,000.
And what about Maddie Silks? Like, tell me her story, because she's kind of more well known.
Yeah, Maddie was kind of the undisputed queen of the Row. She was described as at one point as a well-upholstered and accomplished hellraiser. And she also came from a farming background, and she made her way across through like Indiana and Missouri. She was her born name was Martha A. Niman, and she along the way met and married or a common law wife of a man named Casey Silks. And that's how she came across the last name Silks, which was a perfect name given her profession. So she opened her first sporting house, which, another euphemism for parlor house or brothel, when she was 19. And she opened it up in Springfield, either Illinois or Missouri. It's not known. And then she opened houses in Dodge City and Abilene, Kansas. And she boasted that she was always a madame and never one of the girls.
Of course.
And she said she went into the sporting life for business reasons and for no other. It was a way for women to make money in those days, and she made it. And she eventually makes her way to Denver, but not without stopping in mining towns along the way. And she had maybe 4 or 5 women who worked for her who came along with them. They set up a canvas tent. They had a canvas bathtub. So they offered that service as well. So I'm wondering if it was kind of like the precursor to glamping in a way.
Like, come get a break from the real rough life of being a miner and
Exactly.
hang out with our ladies and maybe take a bath.
They would always set up downhill from the mines because it was easier for the miners to walk downhill to their establishment than to walk uphill to it. So I think, she was a very keen and savvy businesswoman, making her way, like realizing that there's money to be made in these mining camps. There's lonely men, there's very few women. And, if you move from camp to camp, you can make some quick money.
I want to set the scene for folks. You've been talking about the Row. I'm thinking about where this would be in downtown Denver in the 1870s. I think it's known as Market Street now, right?
Yeah, it's Market Street. There were brothels and cribs along the Cherry Creek early on as Denver started to grow and as started to fill in these red light districts, these sin districts, as they're sometimes called, started gravitating towards what was called McGaw Street.
Okay.
And it was McGaw Street in the 1860s. And then it changes its name in 1866 to Holiday Street, which is named after Ben Holiday, who was the stagecoach king of Denver. And by 1887, the Holiday family was, please, can we rename this area? Could it not be named after our predecessor, our ancestor? And so it was named to Market Street. So between Market Street, between about 18th and 23rd was the red light district. So sex work was never legal in Denver, but it was somewhat tolerated as long as it was contained to this one area.
Sure.
There was certainly a hierarchy of establishments along the row. You had the opulent parlor houses. Then you had common brothels. There was high-end brothels, and then there were common brothels. And then there were cribs, which were usually like 1 or 2 room sort of shacks, or they were squeezed in between like bigger establishments. And then you had the women who didn't work inside an establishment, who they were called streetwalkers then. So there was a hierarchy of the women who worked in the parlor houses, kind of looked down upon the women who worked in the brothels, who looked down on the women who worked in the cribs, who looked down on the women who worked on the streets.
You've described kind of a hierarchy of establishments. Like the parlor houses were known for being opulent and genteel. But I wonder, what was it like to work in, or what was it like to visit one of these lower end brothels, like the no frills, like just regular, come on over, meet a lady.
Yes.
Hang out.
Well, and not even hang out. I mean, it was, they were very quick transactions. They talk about, on a payday, the miners and the ranchers and the cowboys would come into Denver to euphemistically see the elephant, which was a euphemism for just having a good time.
Okay.
But they would come into Denver and they would line up outside of these cribs, and they had their money in one hand, their hat in the other, and they never took their boots off. It was quick business, and on a payday, a crib girl could see 30 to 50 customers in a day. I mean,
That's heavy. That's a lot.
It's bleak, too.
Yeah.
I mean, I think, talking about the parlor houses and talking about women like Maddie Silks and Jenny Rogers, who lived these sort of romantic lives. I don't want to romanticize them because they certainly had their share of troubles. I mean, they had troubles with the law. They had troubles in their personal lives. They were also in the business of selling sex.
Yeah.
And that's not always...
It doesn't always... I like you're saying the romanticization part of it. I think we can fall into this trope of what we imagine the Wild West to be. Mm-hmm. And then the realities.
You think of Miss Kitty in Gunsmoke, and the saloon girl with the heart of gold. But I mean, I think the reality of it was most women worked in cribs and common brothels or on the streets. They often used sex work as a way to supplement really meager earnings because there wasn't a lot of options for women to make money. And this was a quick way to make money. It didn't mean that it was the preferred
Sure.
your preferred profession. So somewhere between like the romanticization of women like Maddie Silks and Jenny Rogers and the parlor houses and just sort of the bleak grim reality of working the streets or working in a crib. I mean, somewhere is the actual experience.
So how were sex workers viewed by the rest of society at this time?
Poorly. Victorian perspectives on sexuality, particularly women who engaged in sex work, saw them as somehow depraved. They were compromised somehow sexually and morally. That a woman fell, the idea of the fallen angel, that women fell into sex work because they had been somehow seduced or they had been traduced or they had been stolen away by an unscrupulous man. And yet it was also considered a necessary evil because there's also like Victorian sexual perspectives that men needed this sort of release, lest they take out their sexual urges out on their wives.
They go to this sort of what is perceived to be a lesser version.
Yeah, but at the same time, like why parlor houses were so popular was because they gave another experience. That these women, the women who worked in parlor houses, were expected to be educated. They're expected to be attractive. They're expected to be well-mannered. So, yeah, there's this idea, this sentimentality about the fallen angel. She's usually of a good family. She's predominantly white. She's always good looking. But somehow she has fallen. She's tripped down the primrose path to sin. And now this is her only choice. She has no other recourse.
And I feel like this narrative that is not uncommon even today is that there's no agency. These women don't have agency over their bodies or experiences. And I know that's an important component of the conversation around sex work in present day. But I wonder, have you gotten a sense in your research that these women had a sense of agency over their work?
I do. I think this idea of the fallen angel, like you said, like removes any sense of agency, that you're forced into this lifestyle. But many women chose sex work for, as many reasons as women choose sex work now, because it pays the bills. Desertion by, like divorce and desertion by like a wage earning male,
right?
Yeah, like head of household. This sort of economic precarity of like having to depend on a male head of household for your livelihood. When that's taken away, there's not a lot of options left, and you could work as a seamstress or a laundress or a milliner or any of these low wage jobs that were offered. Yeah, factory work, or you could take up sex work and make. Whereas one makes $6 a week, maybe, in a laundry where you might actually be dealing with sexual harassment by the men who are working there. At least you've chosen.
You have a little bit more control in the agency, and like the power dynamics could be maybe challenged a little bit more than in other places, especially in this Victorian era society.
Right,
it's very buttoned up.
And you make $6, $4 a week as a laundress. Lil Powers, she was a laundress for a while and then changed that profession for the oldest profession. She made $1 a week, and half of it went to rent. Compare that to making $30 a night.
Right. It's just like it's a no-brainer.
Right.
I just have a question about I'm thinking about, I grew up in the 90s, and I think about Craigslist and Backpage, and now I would say maybe Instagram and OnlyFans are ways that sex workers can connect with their clientele. How were women doing this in a society that felt on the surface to maybe need to be discreet?
There were Publications. There was a publication called The Reliable Guide to Denver's Pleasure Resorts.
Okay.
We call it the Denver Red Book, and it lists among like places to get cigars and a good drink. It also lists resorts owned by different proprietresses, advertising how many rooms they had, that, discretion was promised. Everything was first class in every respect. So that was one way to advertise.
Sure.
Also, the madams were very slick marketers. They would often hold discount nights, or they would hire marching bands to parade down Market Street advertising their houses.
So good.
Public water fights, public pillow fights, which apparently has always been a thing.
Oh, so we're talking like those, when I see those like mud wrestling things and wet t-shirt contests, this is not a new phenomenon.
It's not a new phenomenon. I mean, this was a way to market the ladies of the house and their various physical attributes.
Oh my gosh. I love that image.
I can't even imagine what Market Street must have been like in the late 1800s, early 1900s. It must have just swarms of people, and the sounds and the smells and it. I mean, I've done walking tours of Market Street, and it's always really loud and hard to talk over the crowd. But like I can't imagine what it would have been like then.
Oh my God, Anne, well, I could talk to you forever.
I could talk about it forever too.
But I really appreciate you giving this perspective and sharing this story, because it's just something I think about when I wander around downtown. You think about what happened before.
Every time I walk down Market Street, the House of Mirrors still stands.
Right. Where is that?
It's right next to Lodo's.
Okay.
Maddie Silks sold it in like 1918 to a Buddhist monastery, a Buddhist church.
The conflicting energy in that building's got to be amazing. So, but folks this is something you could...
Yeah, you can go. It's 1942 Market Street, and you can see the House of Mirrors. Most of the parlor houses were torn down or turned into warehouses during the Prohibition. Now most of them are parking lots. But there's a couple that are still there.
That's awesome. Well, Anne Sneesby Cook, thank you so much for joining me.
Oh, you're so welcome.
And here's what else Denverites are talking about. Bison. Last week, Denver transferred 35 bison from our mountain park herds to the Northern Arapaho and Eastern Shoshone tribes. According to Denverite, this transfer has become an annual tradition since 2021, when local tribal elders reached out to the Parks Department and started a conversation. At the transfer in Genesee Mountain Park last week, William Talbot said that they've been building on that relationship, quote, the way it should have been. The current bison agreement runs through 2030, so we can expect this unique repatriation project to continue. And speaking of the effort to redress crimes of the past, we have an update on a story we brought you last December about the Denver Art Museum and the international trade in stolen cultural artifacts. The Denver Post reports that the dam has decided to remove the late Emma Bunker's name from the gallery that has carried her name since 2021. They are also returning the $125,000 she donated to the museum. Bunker was previously implicated in an international art trafficking scheme led by Douglas Latchford. She reportedly used her status as a scholar to manipulate the dam into validating and elevating the value of his stolen goods. That's the power of good journalism, people. That's all for today here on CityCast Denver. If you enjoyed the show, why not take a minute to tell the ghost of Maddie Silks about us? Rate the show wherever you get your podcasts and subscribe to our morning newsletter, Hey Denver, by texting Denver to 66866. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye-bye. I was named after a character that Jane Fonda plays. She plays a sex worker in this movie, Clute. And my mom saw it when she was pregnant with me. And she was like, I love this name. I'm going to pick it. And then she's like, and then like 3 of my girlfriends named their kids Brie after I did it. And I was like, I'm sure it was you, Mom. I'm sure you really came up with it. The movie posters look amazing. I would recommend it. It also involves a telephone with a cord. So, I love it. Old school.